Today, our supply chains are global, and sometimes they break down. In the early 1800s, supply chains were a lot shorter, but the lack of mechanized transportation sometimes made it tremendously difficult to bring goods to market. Yet, a regional marketplace did thrive. In this episode of our series McHistory, we learn the Central Illinois trade and trail routes for a couple of important commodities.
In the early days, he drove cattle to Ohio, his last drive there being in 1841.
Before the great cattle drives on the Great Plains after the Civil War, and think of the cowboys and the Wild West, there were the cattle and hog drovers of Central Illinois.
I'm Connor Munson. I'm a graduate intern at the McLean County Museum of History.
I'm Bill Kemp, librarian, McLean County Museum of History.
As soon as I could ride a horse, which was almost as soon as I could walk, I don't remember when I could not ride, I assisted in the business, herding, driving cattle, and such.
Before the arrival of railroads, it was just too expensive to transport bulky agricultural commodities, large distances via grain wagon.
My first drive to Chicago in 1843 when I was 16. The cattle were driven in lots of 200 or 300 and the hogs in droves of 800 to 1,200.
Men like Isaac Funk, one of the great cattle kings, are converting that grain, primarily corn, into what? Protein. And then that animal can march itself to market. So this was known as corn on the hoof.
Before he commenced driving to Chicago, he drove cattle and hogs to Galena, where the lead mines early made quite a market.
Here, his son, George Washington Funk, recount what it was like to be on a cattle and hog drive. He was the oldest of 9 of the children of Cassandra and Isaac Funk. He was born in 1827 here in McLean County.
The drive would commence at daylight and continue leisurely till dark, making with cattle 10 or 12 miles a day, and with hogs a little less.
Isaac Funk, he becomes such a prominent cattle king only 3 decades after the founding of McLean County, and Isaac Funk's holdings in just the county of McLean include more than 25,000 acres.
We drove slowly to allow the cattle to feed on the native grass, of which there was an abundance by the wayside.
Often you would drive hogs in concert with cattle. The hogs would follow the cattle because conveniently they could eat the undigested corn that was in the manure that the cattle were depositing. So you could get kind of a 2-for-1 there, if you will, right?
Father purchased the cattle by the head and not by weight. There was no facility for weighing, but he was an exceedingly good judge of the weight, condition, and value of stock, and was seldom deceived. The stock was all paid for when purchased in coin or bank bills, principally those of Ohio, Indiana, and Missouri state banks, which were good. This necessitated Father's carrying large sums of money. I do not think anyone ever attempted to rob him. He was too resolute, active, and powerful for any ordinary man to attack.
Initially in the 1820s into the 1830s, these cattle and hog drives were across unbroken prairie. But as the state, central and north central Illinois, becomes settled in the 1840s, the Chicago Cattle Trail, as it was known, you begin to see waysides pop up. These were kind of inns to take care of drovers.
I remember one time, late in the fall, we crossed the Kankakee at Beard's Crossing, and the river there was about 400 yards wide, and the water about a foot deep with occasional holes, much deeper, and the hogs would follow the wagon. But the current was so swift there was great danger that they might be swept off the ford into the deeper waters and drowned.
And it wasn't until the mid-1860s that the packing houses in Chicago featured ice-cooled storage facilities, so this butchering had to be done in colder weather, so these cattle and hog drives were done in the late fall and early winter months, and oftentimes it just could be horrifying when it came to the weather they would face.
Someone had to wade into the water and keep the hogs in line on the ford. One after another of the men excused themselves on the ground that they had colds or might take cold. Then Father told me to go in. When Father told us boys to do anything, we did not wait for a second invitation.
As the meat was being packed, it would undergo repeated treatments of a kind of a chemical solution that was known as the pickle, right? And this was salt and sugar and potassium nitrate.
At first, my feet felt like clods and I could scarcely lift them. They were so chill. But we got the hogs over all right, and I was no worse for it. I do not know whether that was due to my youthful health and strength or to a glass of whiskey Father gave to each of us that night. Whiskey in those days was supposed to be a sure preventative for colds and malaria.
This activity would have just an utterly profound impact on the Corn Belt because the meat packing industry really helps lay the foundation for the industrialization of the Midwest. It's kind of an edge industry.
McHistory is a co-production of WGLT and the McLean County Museum of History, bringing you the words and ideas of those who have gone before. WGLT's Charlie Schlenker produced this episode.